Rebbe. Today is the birthday of the Mitteler Rebbe. It's the Histalkus Elul of the Mitteler Rebbe. Tonight is the Chag HaGeula. Yud Kis is the Chag HaGeula of the Mitteler Rebbe, like I explained to you. And I also explained to you, I don't know who I taught what when, but I spoke about this yesterday. I guess it's different girls. That the Mitteler Rebbe's Chag HaGeula never really took off because of the Mitteler Rebbe's passing away. What we understand is, and it says in the Beis Rebbe, I looked it up today in the morning, that when they let the Mitteler Rebbe go, if you know the story, when the Mitteler Rebbe was arrested, there was a trial. And the trial was based on an accusation which was made by other Yidden. The Mitteler Rebbe showed up in the court, dressed in Big Day Shabbos. He wore white. He looked like a malach. And he confronted his accusers face to face. And they became so it's a tumult that the judge Pashat threw him out of the court. He threw him out. He threw the case out. The thing was so stupid on the face of the Reisgevarf. So it was a big victory. It was a big victory. But behind the scenes, the government decided to do anyways their own investigations, and they never left the Mitteler Rebbe alone till he passed away. They never left him alone. They bothered him and they bothered him and they bothered him. Anyway, the Mitteler passed away on his 54th birthday, and I like I explained to you once before, when I do these classes, I don't repeat the same thing 4 times because I'll go out of my mind. Every class gets another piece of the pie. So I'm doing the Mitteler Rebbe's biography, and I'm holding with you in the I discussed yesterday the Mitteler Rebbe's Histalkus in this room with bodies that look just like yours. I don't know if you were here, you were not here. What I'm doing now with this period, I'm talking about Chassidim in the Mitteler Rebbe. And I'm talking about the Hillel Paratcher. I'm talking about Hillel Paratcher. The Hillel Paratcher was a chassid of the Mitteler Rebbe's and a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek's. By the Mitteler Rebbe, he was, quote, the younger light, from the younger chassidim. By the Tzemach Tzedek, he was from the Cheshuvim, he was from the very, very respectable chassidim, Reb Hillel. The Hillel Paratcher was from the first chassidim who was a chassid ben chassid. You understand? His father was a chassid. It was not so common. Rabbi Hillel Paratcher was a chassid ben chassid. His father was a Chernobyl chassid. Then was a Meir Alevi. And Rabbi Hillel started out as a Chernobyl, but he was drawn to the Tanya, and eventually he was drawn to the Alter Rebbe, and he came to the Mitteler Rebbe, Rabbi Hillel. But at Tzemach Tzedek, Rabbi Hillel was very, very important. First he was Rav in Babroisk, which was a smaller city. Then he was Rav in Paratch. Apparently Paratch is a very big city, Rabbi Hillel Paratcher. But at Tzemach Tzedek, he was very, very important. He was very important. At Tzemach Tzedek, very important. There's a story which the Friedrich Rebbe talks about in great detail, which was called the Shabbos von der Nekuda Pnimi Yatzmi, something like that. I think called the Shabbos von der Nekuda Pnimi Yatzmi. It's Shabbos Pashas Ba'aloischa, I think Tovkuf Tzadik Aleph or Tzadik Beis. It was 3.5 years after the Mitteler passed away. 3.5 years. And the Tzemach Tzedek was Rebbe, but it was still sort of like teetering. It wasn't so strong. And it was right after Shavuos. All the biggest chassidim, who were the biggest chassidim of the Mitteler Rebbe, came to Tzemach Tzedek that Shabbos. And that Shabbos, they sort of all committed themselves to be chassidim of the Tzemach Tzedek. They had been chassidim of the Mitteler Rebbe. The biggest names: Reb Peretz Chaim, Reb Yitzchak Isaac Vitebsker, Reb Isaac Homler, Reb Hillel Paratcher, Reb Nechemia Dubrovne, Reb Chaim, I don't know. They were the biggest names who were big chassidim of the Mitteler Rebbe, and they had a very hard time. Tzemach Tzedek was definitely a different kind of Rebbe than the Mitteler Rebbe. Very different kind of Rebbe. But they gave themselves over. And then each one of them went back to their place, and they made a big uproar that the younger light should go to Lubavitch. Reb Hillel was very important by the Tzemach Tzedek. And one of the things he did, which was really very special, if you have the right kind of people, you can do this. People came to Lubavitch to learn Chassidus. Now you have to understand, not everybody came to Lubavitch was a big tzaddik. A lot of people were regular people. But there were many people coming to Lubavitch who were big Talmidei Chachamim, big Yirei Shamayim, and they were capable of becoming deep Chabad. Chabad is not a game, Pindelach. Chabad, Chassidus is not a game. Chabad Chassidus is a full-time job. I'm not talking about learning Gemara. I'm talking about serving Hashem. B'chlal, the whole point of Chassidus was to teach people how to connect to God. Not how to study Torah, how to connect to God. But Chabad has what's called the long-short approach to connect to Hashem with that of Chabad. It's a lifetime of work. And you have to have a big mind and a big heart. And you know what else you got to have? A lot of time. You can't become a Chabadnik if you're working for, I don't know, minimum wage. A lot of people are very poor. But it's a tifa chassidus. Chabad is a serious thing. And the Rabbeim were teaching people Chabad. But if a Rebbe had Chassidim who could quote unquote help him and made the job so much better. So by the earlier generations happened a lot. The Alter Rebbe did this, but the Mitteler Rebbe did it a lot. Tzemach Tzedek did it also. The Tzemach Tzedek had addresses of Chassidim that were very great, and he would send the younger light to them. Everybody knows the story of Rashbatz, right? You read that story in high school. Rashbatz, the one who got hit with a stick, becoming a chassid. The one that the Tzemach Tzedek sent him to the Mitteler, the blind pigeon. You don't know the story? Where did you guys grow up? Bobiv. The Mitteler was the great Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek sent Rashbatz to the Mitteler. The Rabbeim used to send younger light, young Chassidim, to elder Chassidim to learn Darkei Chassidus. And one of the biggest addresses was Rabbi Hillel Paritcher. And there's many famous names of Chassidim that we know who learned, their Rebbe was the Tzemach Tzedek, but they learned the Derech HaChassidus, how to daven, and how to learn Chassidus, how to contemplate. Rabbi Hillel Paritcher was considered one of the biggest Mavinim. He understood Chassidus better than most people. Rabbi Hillel Paritcher's Rebbe was a great Chassid by the name of Reb Zalman Zezman. Rabbi Hillel Paritcher Mashpia. And Rabbi Hillel Paritcher, a lot of people knew a lot of Chassidus. Rabbi Hillel understood. Rabbi Hillel's understanding of Chassidus was Yossi Geveinlich. And Rabbi Hillel gave over Chassidus to many great personalities who you may have heard about, you may have not heard about. I don't know if you've heard of Geshem Ber Paharer and Reb Shmuel Ber Barisever and others like that. Many Chassidim who were in Lubavitch, they were considered the senior Chassidim, who got their Chassidus in Reb Hillel. And the Tzemach Tzedek used to send you a light to Reb Hillel that to teach the Darkei Chassidus. Reb Hillel was a Rav, he was a busy man. He was a Rav, and he had the other responsibilities. He also used to travel to the Kherson for the Mitteler Rebbe. I'll get back to that in a moment. But he found time for these younger light. They would sit in Paritch, some for a year, some for 6 months, and he would teach them Chassidus. He wouldn't just teach them Maimorim. He would teach them how to daven with Chassidus. And there was a whole Seder. He had Fabrengens. It was very earnest. It was very serious. And a lot of people got their Darkei Chassidus, their ways of Chassidus. There was a chassid, a big makubal, it was Rebbe Hoffman. I don't know if Rebbe Hoffman, could be he was also by Rebbe Hillel, but a lot of the famous personalities that we know, they got their chassidus from Rebbe Hillel Paritcher. I'll give you an example. In Lubavitch, there was a famous mashpia, very famous mashpia, the most famous mashpia in Lubavitch. His name was Shmuel Greinem Esterman, the Greinem they call him. Shmuel Greinem Esterman had himself 2 mashpiyim. One taught him Chassidus, and one taught him what's around Chassidus. The one who taught him Chassidus was named Shmuel Ber Bar Yisrael or the Rashdam. And the one that taught him what's around Chassidus was named Avraham. Both of them were Talmidim of Rebbe Hillel. You understand? Rebbe Hillel Paritcher's influence on the future of Chassidus. You could make a case that the Chassidus that we understand today were children of Rebbe Hillel. Because Rebbe Hillel taught people how to understand it. Rebbe Hillel taught people how to live Chassidus. And the Tzemach Tzedek sent many people to Rebbe Hillel Paritcher. There was a whole seder of how Rebbe Hillel brought the younger light into his derech. Rebbe Hillel, when a new chassid came, Rebbe Hillel would make a special Shabbos. And he would teach 3 nigunim. And then he would tell a story. That was to say, he would tell a story, and he would learn the story. This was the Shalom Aleichem of each young man that came to him. And the Hillel Paritcher taught people how to be Chassidim. Some of the biggest Chassidim of the Tzemach Tzedek got their training, got their directions about how to be a Chassid from the Hillel Paritcher. And the Hillel Paritcher was a great enough man to be responsible for this. And it was a service. One of the things he did for the Tzemach Tzedek was to ois hadav in the younger light. Some of the greatest names of Chassidim that we know got their hadracha from Rebbe Hillel Paritcher. And we're the Talmidim of those Talmidim. That's the chain. It was a very big thing they did for the Rebbe. Another thing about Rebbe Hillel Paritcher was that the Mitteler Rebbe, whose yahrzeit is today, had sent 2,000 families of Chassidim from Russia to live in Kherson, which is in the Ukraine, which is far away from Lubavitch. 2,000 mishpachas. It's a lot of people. The reason he did it was because in Russia there was no parnasa. There was the war with Napoleon. Napoleon destroyed White Russia. He burnt everything to the ground, destroyed everything, scorched earth, and people were very poor. Rabbi Hillel got from the government of Russia incredibly fertile land that was, they used to call the Ukraine the breadbasket of the world until Stalin ruined it, Yimach Shmei. And he settled 2,000 Mishpachim. They lived it from the 1810s until the Holocaust. 130 years, Chassidim lived in those places, and they did very well. They did well financially. They used to even send money to Lubavitch. And the whole Chersona colonies were under the influence of Lubavitch. The Chersona colonies already had a Lubavitch Rebbe. I'm just for an example. Our Rebbe, the Rebbe Zogazunzain, was born in Nikolaev. Nikolaev was the big city near the Cherson. All the Chersona colonies came to Nikolaev for the halacha, for the piskei dinim. The Rebbe's grandfather, Rebbe Shlomo Yanovsky, and his grandfather, Lendavut, were Lubavitcher Rabbonim living in Nikolaev because they served the colonies of Cherson, which the Mitteler Rebbe had founded. And some very, very famous people came from the Chersona colonies. But they didn't want to go. They didn't want to leave Russia. They had no food. They were starving, but they didn't want to leave anyway. And the Mitteler Rebbe says, you'll go to the Cherson, you'll have a good life, you'll be able to have parnasa, it's honest and honorable. You'll be working hard, you'll earn your bread with your own hands, it's going to be kosher. The Mitteler Rebbe loved the idea of a frum farmer. He loved it. But they said, we're going to be far away from the Rebbe, we're not going to be able to Chassidus. So the Mitteler Rebbe said, I'll come to you. I'll come to you. The Mitteler Rebbe promised that every year in the summer he would come and spend a month in Cherson and bring the Chassidus to them. And that was the T'nai under which they went. The Mitteler Rebbe went once. I think Pei Aleph. You could dates, you could look at it. People know the dates. He never went again because he got physically ill. He got sick. Towards the end of his life, the Mitteler Rebbe got very sick, and the Tzemach Tzedek became very, very... The Tzemach Tzedek shied away from the Mitteler Rebbe. When the Mitteler Rebbe was a Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek was out of the picture. He wanted to do his own thing, like our Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe. But towards the end, the Mitteler Rebbe became sick, and the Tzemach Tzedek got very involved. He literally, Tzemach Tzedek and the Mitteler Rebbe became like one person. But one year he went to the Cherson. The next year he couldn't go already. So he called in Rabbi Hillel Paltiel. He said to Rabbi Hillel Paltiel, I made a promise that I'm not able to keep. I made a promise that every summer I'm going to go to the Cherson, I'm going to bring Chassidus Chabad to the Chassidim who moved away from White Russia to the Ukraine for the purposes of Parnas. I can't go. He physically couldn't go. I want you to go on my behalf. It was a shlichus. And he said to him, quote, Du sollst sehen Ruchnius und schneiden Gashmius. Your job has two parts. You should seed Ruchnius, you should plant seeds of Ruchnius, and you should harvest Gashmius, you should bring back money from Maimid from the Cherson. And Rabbi Hillel Paltiel did this for over 40 years. Every summer he would travel to the Cherson. And when he was in the Cherson, he was like a Rebbe. He would say Chassidus, he would give brachas, he would give eitzah, I even think he gave brachas. And he was incredibly, and he continued this. The Mitteler Rebbe made a promise, which he was not able to keep, but through Rabbi Hillel Paltiel, every single summer went to the Cherson. And he did it during the last years of Mitteler Rebbe's life, and all the years at Tzemach Tzedek's Nesius, every summer Rabbi Hillel Paltiel traveled to the Cherson. This was a promise that he made, and he kept it his whole life. In fact, he actually passed away in the Cherson. He passed away in Cherson. He's buried in Cherson, I don't know in what city, and it says that they have an oil on his tzion. I don't know if we know where that is today, I don't know, but he's not buried in Paltiel. And there's a very strange story attached to it. Two stories attached to the Hillel Paltiel's Hishtalkus. The first is that he passed away in the winter. In the winter. No. First is not like that. The Hillel Paltiel, the story was that he fasted Tisha B'Av. And the way people told me the story was he fasted for 2 days. We fast Tisha B'Av one day. Mishagoyim, like Hillel Paltiel, fasted for 2 days. Because the Beis HaMikdash actually did most of its burning, not on Tesav, but on Yudav. And after he fasted for 48 hours, he was an old man, he was 69 years old, Rabbi Hillel felt that it was too much, and he screamed, "Vu zanen geben der Rabbanim? Where were the Rabbanim will let me fast for 2 days? I promised you, had any of told him not to fast, he wouldn't have listened anyway, but he had someone to blame." He passed away, Yud Aleph Menachem, passed away the next day. Yud Aleph of is the Yahrzeit of Hillel Parasha, Yud Aleph of, I think. And they buried him in the Cherson. The story was, years later, a tailor died. He was come from. It was very cold, and it was snow. They dug a grave and they buried him. When the snow melted, they realized he was a Hillel Parasha's neighbor, next to Mamish. And it's a nishge passed that this guy should lay next to the Hillel. So the whole discussion about moving his remains. And one of the people said, wait, this is too fortuitous, this is too precise. That they didn't know where they were burying him, and should punk next to the Hillel. So they decided before they move him, they should send a message to this person's town from where he lived and find out who he was. Anyway, they found out the following story. That the Hillel Parasha was once traveling, and he needed a minyan. And he had only 9 people with him, and he needed a 10th. And they told him, not far from here there's a tailor, but he's not particularly from, and he's not going to come to the minyan. He said, bring him. Anyway, the guy came, and he said, I need you a 10th for a minyan. He says, why should I stay? He said, please, I need you. I'm not interested. So Bill says, okay, what would you like? The man says, if you want me to stay for me, you have to give me something. So Hillel Parasha said, if you agree to stay with the minyan, you'll lay next to me after 120. This was in Russia. They both passed away in the Ukraine, and this guy had a relative, and they pushed it, ended up boom next to each other. So Maise Pele Play Mamish. And the other story is even crazier. Rabbi Hillel was a tzaddik. He was a tzaddik, the biggest tzaddik. He was a very, very big garbage stock. He was always raising money for tzedakah. And he would raise money for different causes, and he would do it. But if he didn't have money, he would borrow. The Pilcher used to borrow money for tzedakah to help people in different needs, and then he would have to collect the money post facto to pay back his debts. It's the hardest way. If you're a fundraiser, never ever tell anybody you want to raise funds to pay your debts. They'll never give you a dime. It's for a building project. As long as it's human nature to give tzedakah to pay debts is a special kind of tzaddik. When Rabbi Hillel passed away, he left many, many debts, a lot of debts. And people start to complain. You know, he borrowed money and then you drop dead, and it started becoming Chal Hashem. So it was a Yid, we know his name, I don't remember it, who had no money. But he stepped forward and he said, he made a public announcement that the Hillel Parasha left money by him. And anybody who, or the Hillel Parasha owes money to you, come with a shtar, with a document that proves it was your money, and he'll pay the debt. The guy didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. He bankrupted his whole life. He gave everything he had, his house, his business. He paid every one of Rabbi Hillel's debts. And he himself lost Aleph. He became mamish destitute.
He had a family?
He had a family. It was on Poshta Besiras Nefesh that from Hillel Parasha should not become a Chil Hashem. And he was Zoychet that had an Einikel that was Poshet in his image. It's the Moedendik Amais. This man's grandson, not his son, his grandson was in the image of Hillel Parasha. But here's the end of the story. He had a daughter whose name was Elke. Elke had a son whose name is Rabbi Yitzchak Masmid. Rabbi Yitzchak the Masmid. Any Gereviches in the room? Gorowitzes? Anybody Gerevich? Yeah. Yitzchak the Masmid. Yitzchak the Masmid was very similar to Hillel Parasha in many ways. He was a very big chassid. He was a very, very big goan. And he was from like you have no idea. Rabbi Hillel was a very interesting man. He was a real chassid. A real chassid. But there's stories about the Hillel Parasha that your poshet can't say about any other chassid. You know, Rabbi Hillel, I once heard from a radical Lubavitcher of our generation. You know, Lubavitcher Chassidim, what we call Deira Shvi, right, the 7th generation. What makes us special compared to the 6 generations before us? Nothing, except one thing. We do what we're told. Ma'aseh action. Rabbi Hillel Parasha had a property of his kashrus, which is like ours, mamish. He was a very special chassid, a very unusual man. The Tzemach Tzedek said about the Hillel Parasha that he's half Rebbe. Tzemach Tzedek about half Rebbe. I think Tzemach Tzedek said I have 2.5 chassidim, and the half a chassid was Reb Hillel. So he said Hillel's only half a chassid. So Tzemach Tzedek answered, the ander halb is Rebbe, the other half is Rebbe.
Who was the other of the 2?
I don't know. But the Our Rebbe said that when the Tzemach Tzedek said the ander halb is Rebbe, the other half is Rebbe, he didn't mean like by the Poilische, the other half is O Rebbe. He meant that the other half is the Tzemach Tzedek. Rebbe Hillel was so makusher, he was a big chassid. And I mean, you hear the word Iskashas all the time. And for us, the word Iskashas means we do what we're told. For giants of Chassidus, Iskashas means v'nafshek shura, v'nafshek, there's a neshama connection. The biggest Chassidim Poshet felt the neshama of their Rebbe. They felt it. And the Rebbe was connected to the neshama of his Chassidim in a very felt way. When the Tzemach Tzedek said that Hillel v'nahal Rebbe, he meant that half of the Hillel parasha was the Tzemach Tzedek himself. He was a very, very deep makush, very deeply connected to the Rebbe. In other words, as great as he was in his own personal right, he was a chassid. A chassid means he has a Rebbe. It's not just a formality. He drew from the Rebbe not just Torah, he drew from the Rebbe Poshet his connection to the Eibishter, to such an extent that the Rebbeim said about the Hillel, as a half from the Hillel is Rebbe, half of the Rebbeim said that half of the Hillel Pacha was Rebbe. But there's some very weird stories about the Hillel. Here's a crazy story. And to me, what's crazy about the story is that the Rebbe told the story. I heard the Rebbe at least twice. And if you know anything about the Rebbe, you know the Rebbe has no patience for Chassidim who have their own minds. The Rebbe's whole Matthias is his kashrus. And nevertheless, this story the Rebbe told to Philip, I heard it at least twice from the Rebbe, at least twice, maybe 3 times. And in my years, the Rebbe wasn't telling a lot of stories, but this story he told. That the Tzemach Tzedek said Amay Mechsidus. Tzemach Tzedek said Amay Mechsidus. And the Chassidim had an argument about the Pshat and the Maimer. Who was the argument between? The Tzemach Tzedek's children. The biggest Chassidim with Groshe Kep were arguing Pshat and the Maimer. And when the dust settled, it basically became everybody against Rebbe Hillel. Rebbe Hillel had one approach, everybody else had a different approach. And I would just want to say, I said this to the girls in the previous room, I think, Rebbe Hillel Parash's understanding of Chassidus, was very, very special. His mashpia was Reb Zalman Zezmer, and his Talmidim were the mashpiyim of the mashpiyim of Lubavitch. Rebbe Hillel Parash's influence on understanding Chassidus could be reaches us. It could be that the way we understand Chassidus today has to do with mashpiyim who learned from mashpiyim who soft go back to Rebbe Hillel. He had a very deep understanding of Chassidus, a tiefer verstand of Chassidus. The Shmuel Bar Bar said, "Ich kennt zwei, was verstehen Chassidus." Rebbe Hillel und der Rashab. The Rashab meant the Rebbe Rashab. Now to put a chassid and a Rebbe in the same sentence is a little bit chutzpahdik, and it was chassid. Rebbe was old chassid. Rebbe was a makabah for Rebbe Hillel Parish. Rebbe Hillel, he understands. He really gets it. Teres Chassidus. So everybody argues, and Rebbe Hillel's on one side, everyone's on the other side. It doesn't make him wrong. Anyway, they decided to go after Tzemach Tzedek. He's the Baal HaMaimer. It's his Maimer. They come to the Tzemach Tzedek, they ask him Pshat Maimer, and Tzemach Tzedek disagreed with the Hillel Parash. He was on the other team. Everybody against Rebbe Hillel. So they turned around to Rebbe Hillel. They said, "No, at least now admit that you made a mistake." He says, "Nope, my Pshat is right." He said, "I don't understand. This is the Baal HaMaimer. It's Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer. He's disagreeing with you." And the Rebbe repeated this. That's what's the Pella. And Rebbe Hillel Parash said, "When a Rebbe sagt Chassidus, it is Kinesinos mi Sinai." When the Rebbe says Chassidus, it's Dvara Deshem Dibebi Umalasi Al Sheinom, it's Ruach HaKodesh. Veistach, what the Lashon? There's psukim that when a Navi speaks, he speaks the word of God. It's not his words. After he says the Maimer, he has the same obligation of Talmud Torah as everybody else. When the Rebbe says the Maimer, it's Shechinah B'Stich Greinei. After he says the Maimer, he has to learn the Maimer that he just said like anybody else. And when he learns it, you have to understand it according to your seichel. The Rebbe understands it his way, and I understand it my way, and that was the end. He wouldn't back away. Now, the story is a crazy story. But that our Rebbe repeated it. The Rebbe had no patience, people who were smarter than the Rebbe. None at all. But Rebbe Hillel was so makusha that when he disagreed with the Tzemach Tzedek, it was a part of his discussions. That's how big a chassid he was. His connection to the Tzemach Tzedek was, the Mitteler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, he was a very big chassid, not only in the sense that he was a great man, he was a very big chassid in the sense that he understood how important the Rebbe is, which is a deep thing, especially if you're very big. You know, a little guy like you and me, of course the Rebbe is great, because we're nobodies. But people who are, you know, up there, they start to think, you know, like, you know, Rebbe Hillel, as great as he was, knew that Rebbe is another thing. And he was deeply connected to his Rabbeim. One of the classic lines that the Shmuel Ber Bar Yisrael said, he was a makabel for Rebbe Hillel. The Shmuel Bar Yisrael used to say, Unser Asogel Lagabe Rebbe Hillel is wie the cats. The way we understand Chassidus compared to Rebbe Hillel Parish, understood Chassidus is like a cat. What's the ratio, what's the relativism of your understanding Chassidus and a cat's, huh? You understand 80%, and the cat understands how much? Huh? What's the answer? He's not on the chart. He's not on the chart. It says, Unser Asogel Lagabe Rebbe Hillel, the way we understand Chassidus compared to Rebbe Hillel is like a cat. And then he would say, Rebbe Hillel's Rebbe Hillel's understanding compared to the Tzemach Tzedek is also like a cat, and he would, the Zelba cats, we're all equal. And Rebbe Hillel Paratcher knew this. He was very important in Lubavitch. He really was. He was a very big chassid. He created a whole generation of Chassidic Chabad on the deepest levels. And he was very connected to the Rebbe, Rebbe Hillel Paratcher. We don't know much about his children. He had a Talmud, Reb Sholem Reb Hillel, as he was called. He was like his makusha. He was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, but he was not his son. I don't know anything about Reb Hillel Paratcher's children. I don't know. I should know, but I don't.
Did the Rebbe say a lesson from the story? Like what it means?
Yeah, of course. The Rebbe told the story to make a point that you're supposed to understand. And you have to understand what you're not allowed to be lazy. And you have to listen to what other people say. But if your seichel understands one way, this is the truth. Even if the Rebbe understands different. Yeah, the Rebbe told the story to bring out the point that this is not, you have to use, you're right. The Rebbe told the story to make this point. Rebbe Hillel was a real chassid. He wasn't a balgaiva. It wasn't necessarily Tzemach Tzedek because he couldn't change, couldn't admit he was wrong kind of thing. Because it was the emes to him. And the Rebbe said, okay, that's how it's supposed to be.
It's very hard, line.
Well, when you'll be Rebbe Hillel, you'll do that. Otherwise, whatever the Rebbe says is good, you know. I'll tell you a Lashon Hara. There was a chassid in our generation who was a very, very big chassid. But people said that he wasn't so makusha to our Rebbe, he was more makusha to Frierdiker Rebbe. So he had a friend, a very close friend, who went into Yechidus to our Rebbe, and he said to our Rebbe about this person that he's a very, very big chassid. He's equal to Rebbe Hillel Paratcher in our times. And the Rebbe said, to Rebbe Hillel? To Rebbe Hillel? In other words, I agree that he's a big chassid, but to Rebbe Hillel? I don't know if you understand the Rebbe Hillel. Rebbe Hillel was something else. One of the stories about Rebbe Hillel Paratcher is, a chassid came to Lubavitch, and he went to the Tzemach Tzedek. He said to the Tzemach Tzedek, I want the Rebbe should say Chassidus for me. And the Tzemach Tzedek said to him, I say Chassidus only on Shabbos, today is not Shabbos. So the Chassid said to the Tzemach Tzedek, when a Chassid comes to Lubavitch, it is Shabbos for Rebbe. Whenever a Chassid comes to the Rebbe, for him it's Shabbos. So maybe I'm asking the Rebbe to honor my Shabbos and say Chassidus. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, Ich halt nicht bei them, I can't. But I'll ask Rebbe Hillel Paratcher to say Chassidus for you. So he said to the Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe, but Rebbe Hillel is Akli Sheni. Akli Sheni is Nish Mevashel. Rebbe Hillel is the second keli, right? You cook it in a pot. You move to the second pot. Kli Sheni is Nish Mevashel, right? On Shabbos, you hope the Kli Sheni is Mevashel, right? When it comes to Chassidus, a second pot doesn't cook. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, yeah. Oh, but there's Yad Seleh Dizbeh. Maybe he's not going to cook you, but he'll certainly burn you. He'll warm you. Yeah. Oh, but there's Yad Seleh Dizbeh. One of the stories about the hill that I love is the following story. It's a Meidendika Mais. Mamash a Meidendika Mais. The Hillel Paratcher was 5 years younger than the Tzemach Tzedek. And he passed away 2.5 years before him. Tzemach Tzedek lived 77 years, and Hillel lived 69, 70 years. Ben Shivim Shana. The Hillel Paratcher hated sick people. Yeah. He didn't like sick people. Kranke feel you're busy with your body your whole day. You're busy with your body. And he used to talk about it a lot, you know, the body. So the Chassidim, the Tzemach Tzedek was ill. Tzemach Tzedek was sick. And it didn't look good according to the Hillel's Teire. A sick person's busy with his body. So one day he was in Lubavitch, and there were a bunch of young chevra, just like you, were complaining, you know. It used to be, now it's no good, it used to be. I mean, you got a real good complaint. And they're saying that, you know, the Rebbe used to be healthy, and there was Maimorim, and there was Fabrengens, and there was Yechidus, and now the Rebbe is so limited, you can't barely go into Yechidus, there's Kam Maimer, everything, the Rebbe's not well. Rabbi Hillel Pacha was sitting in Miss Medrash, and they were having this conversation, and Rabbi Hillel couldn't take it, that they were saying that the Rebbe is nicht gesund. So he stood up, and he walked into the Tzemach Tzedek's cheder. Tzemach Tzedek was paralyzed, he couldn't move. For about 5 years, after the Rebbetzin passed away. Tzemach Tzedek got sick as soon as his wife passed away. He used to say, Ich darf ihr haben da. You know, he said to his kids, you have a mother in Gan Eden, I need her. Very shortly, the Rebbe needed the Rebbetzin. And by our Rebbe was the same thing. He needed the Rebbetzin very much. Tzemach Tzedek got sick shortly after the Rebbetzin, his Rebbetzin, Chaimushka, passed away. Tofresh Chavalov. Anyway, Tzemach Tzedek was paralyzed. He couldn't walk. He once was burning, he was sitting by his table burning padyanas, and his beard caught on fire, his beard. And he couldn't put the fire out. After he started screaming, so he had to come in and isolation. Put the fire out. Rabbi Hill couldn't take it, and they were saying that Tzemach Tzedek isn't well. So he walked into the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek sitting at his desk. And I promise you that Tzemach Tzedek was paralyzed. I'm telling you he was paralyzed. He closes the door, turns around, Rabbi Hill. He walks up to these young guys. And he says, the Rebbe is gesund. The Rebbe is well. Now, Rabbi Hillel Pacha was an old Michiganer, you know. I mean, he was too chassidish for them, you know. Today, it's the young guys are chassidish and the old people are fried. Then it was the other way around. Yeah, of course, Rabbi Hillel Pacha, yeah. So what are you talking about? The Rebbe can't walk, and the Rebbe needs to help the Rebbe. So Rabbi Hillel said, liegt in Ave betanugim. Lozem optret von Ave betanugim wird erkennen gehen. He said to them, the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek can't walk. You know why? He's wallowing in Ave betanugim, the highest madrega of Ave. If you know Chassidus, Ave betanugim is the same madrega as Yirei Eloi. I saw it in one place. It's the highest madrega. It's higher than Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu was Avara, but this is Ave. It's even higher. He says, Lozem optret, let him go away from Ave betanugim. I'm telling you, he could walk. Sheina Maiseh, Sheina Maiseh. But the Maiseh has a sequel. Tzemach Tzedek was paralyzed. He was sitting, but he learned the whole day and the whole night. He could learn Torah here. He had a Meshoris. His name was Chaim Ber. He has Einiklach in Lubavitch tonight. There's a family of Lubavitch in Crown Heights, Chaimson. The Yishalayim Mishpacha, the Einiklach from Chaim Ber, he moved to Eretz Yisrael. He was the Tzemach Tzedek's Gabbai. The guy never slept. He had a cot, a little cot outside the Rebbe's room, and if the Rebbe needed him, he would call him. So when the Rebbe was healthy, he took his fun himself. Every 5 minutes, Chaim Ber, I need a sefer, Chaim Ber, I need a sefer, he didn't sleep. Because Chaim Ber. So one time he decides, he's sleeping, finished. Now it's chutzpahdik, yeah, but the poor guy was falling apart. Chaim Ber, he's sleeping. Chaim Ber, ich bete Chaim Ber, ich darf my sefer. I saw a Rishima. The last Yechidus to the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek asked for a Tanya. So Chaim Ber brought him a Tanya. So the Tzemach Tzedek says, no, but this one doesn't have Yigeres HaTshuva. He says, Rabbi, you know it by heart anyway. Why do I have to bring you in a book? You know it by heart. You know what you know it by heart. I know you know it by heart. The Chassid knows. Someone says, I want to, I have to go get you the book. Just say it by heart. And the Tzemach Tzedek made him go get the book. We know the story because the person who was in Yechida said what happened. Rabbi, he was so exhausted. Rabbi, you know, why have to bring you the book? You know it by heart anyway. No, I want the book. So anyway, Tzemach Tzedek's begging, Chaim Ber, I need a sefer. He knew every sefer in his library by heart. There's a mice with the Rebbe Marash. But he wanted the book inside. Anyway, he's begging it, and Tzemach Tzedek is asking, so after a few minutes, it gets quiet. Chaim Ber is right outside the door. Here's the Tzemach Tzedek seeing the Alter Rebbe's nign, the Dal Bovis. And the man could not walk. He stands up. He walks over to the ladder. The ceiling was tall, a lot of svarim. He moves the ladder, and he climbed up the ladder. He got to save it, he had to climb back down the ladder, sat back down to his place. Chaim Ber never slept again after that. So in other words, Reb Hillel Paritcher was born out. There's a sequel. Reb Hillel Paritcher was born out by a story where the people thought that Tzemach Tzedek, quote, Kenish gain, and Reb Hillel Paritcher says, Lozim up to Tanugim. This was the kind of a chassid that Reb Hillel was. It was a very, very big chassid. Very, very big chassid. I have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to mention another chassid to you, okay? His name was Reb Note. Reb Note from Malastritztiye. That was the name of the shtetl. Too many syllables, me to pronounce correctly. He was a chassid from the Mitteler Rebbe. He was also by the Tzemach Tzedek. He was a Rav. He was a Talmud Chacham. He was a Rav. He was a Pesach Dinim. But he was bittul. He was bottle like dust. Mamish. His bittul was disgusting. I told the girls in the other room that the Mitteler Rebbe said there's only 2 chassidim that I got from them 100% of what I wanted. One was Reb Hillel, one was this Reb Mitteler. Reb Mitteler and Malsis. He was a Rav. But he was a very big Baal Madrege. He was a Oived Elokim. You see, guys, you have to understand this. Girls, forgive me for saying that. Great chassidim were not defined because they were so smart. They served God. They gedient them Eibush with every breath. They davened. They connected to Hashem. That's what chassidus gave them. Longest they could go to the best yeshivas. The Rabbeim, Baal Shem Tov, on. What they brought about was that every person has to have a connection to God, a personal connection to Hashem. And in each Rebbe, each chassidus in its way, and of course Chabad, in the derech of Chabad, these people were deep servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This Reb Mitteler was a great chassid, a very, very big chassid of the Mitteler Rebbe's. I mean, they tell a story which is going to get you very upset. He lost one of his children. He lost one of his children, Eber. So he was sitting Shiva. In the middle of the Shiva, he turns very red, very, very, very red. So people were thinking that he's being misabel. He thought about his daughter and he's experiencing pain, the loss. Anyway, he gets out of this redness. And he says, oh, I got a new maimed from Lubavitch. He had just come from Lubavitch. He brought with him a maimed. This was the kind of a man he was. He was a very, very big chassid, very big, very bitteldik. I heard from a Melech Tzivul Alav Shalom that this Reb Note had written chassidus, written. So you write a maimed, it goes in order. The first page, the second page, the third page. So he had a book of bound pages of handwritten chassidus, but the pages were not in order. It wasn't after page 1 came page 2, came 17, there came 4. It was all messed up. And he could read a maimed, read one page of a maimed, the next page was a different maimed, just keep going. And he would learn like that. So somebody once said to me, Reb Note, how could you learn chassidus like this? It doesn't make any sense. The words don't go together. Don't tell me later you didn't hear what I was saying. Reb Note said, and again, this is a word that it's a whole night of bringing. He said, chassidus is oir. Chassidus is light, it's godliness. Does it make a difference if it's this one or this? In other words, he didn't see a maimed in terms of the philosophy, he saw the maimed in terms of the elokus. The fact that it wasn't in order was a non-issue to him. But the story that we know about this Reb Note was he was later by the Tzemach Tzedek. Just like a Hillel Paritcher. And by the Tzemach Tzedek, he was from the Chshuvim. But he was Reb Note, he was the same mamish, he was a shmata in his own mind. So the Tzemach Tzedek once gave instructions, he probably did this for the effect that would happen. He gave an instruction that when people come to Lubavitch, they're not allowed to sleep in shul. I mean, guests used to walk dozens of miles over the course of many days to come to Lubavitch. They came to Lubavitch, they were exhausted. And the first thing you did when you came to Lubavitch, you lay down on a bench. So at some point, the Tzemach Tzedek gave an instruction that anybody who comes to Lubavitch in the middle of the night, they have to tell them, go to a hotel, you can't sleep in shul. Except Reb Note. Except Reb Note. Reb Note walks into the shul, he lay down on a bench to sleep, was exhausted. So the younger light, weißt du, the Meshachisten, the Greise Chassidim, woke him up, metan schlafen. The Rebbe gesagt, keinen Tag schlafen, äußer Reb Note. They didn't know who he was. So he grunted, I'm tired. So they woke him up, they pushed him, they beat him up, they threw him out into the street. The next day they found out that he was Reb Note. So why did he tell him? Why did he tell him? The Rebbe said nobody could sleep in shul except Reb Note. He forgot that detail. He was a bitteldik idiot. This was the kind of person he is. Don't try to understand such people, just listen to the stories. One more story about Reb Note, which we know. There's probably more that I don't know, but this story I know. He was a Rav. He was a Rav. So Shavuos, all the Rabbanim came to Lubavitch. Shavuos in Lubavitch was a beautiful tzir. The biggest Rabbanim in Russia were Lubavitch Chassidim by the Tzemach Tzedek. So the Rebbe had what was called a nigletish, On Shavuos, there was one meal that was just for the Rabbanim, and it was the milcha kesuda, the milcha meal. I don't think they washed, they ate cake. And the Tzemach Tzedek made kiddush, and they made mezonos. And the Tzemach Tzedek used to be matzia and inyan nigla. He would introduce an idea nigla, and there would be a whole conversation amongst the Rabbanim and Lomdas. So this nigla tish was by invitation only. It was an exclusive group of people who were big Talmidei Chachamim. Tzemach Tzedek was sitting at the head of the table. So during one of these nigla tishin, Tzemach Tzedek took a glass, a cup, and there was all kinds of mashka on the table. There was this kind of wine and that kind of wine and this kind of whiskey and this kind of vodka and this kind of I don't know what. And he made a noxious drink. He put together a cup from all these different mashkais. You couldn't look at it, let alone drink it. It was impossible to drink. It was noxious. It was poison. Tzemach Tzedek took this cup and he handed it to one of his sons and said, drink it. Now the son saw what the Tzemach Tzedek put into the drink. He said, Papa, I can't drink that. So he gave it to another chassid, another one of his children. And after he offered to a number of his children and nobody wanted it, he offered to some of the big chassidim and nobody wanted it. Reb Nate was sitting at the end of the table at the edge over here. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, Git es Nate. Nate is ayin. When ayin is neisei hafchim, give it to Nate. Nate is ayin, he's nothing. And ayin can tolerate contradictions. So the cup went down to the end of the table, and they told Reb Nata, the Rebbe said to drink it, so he knocked it down, the guy said Maisa, and that was it. It probably was very unpleasant. Tzemach Tzedek said to drink, he drank. Later, the Chassidim said, you heard what the Rebbe said about you? A compliment? You know, the Rebbe said about a chassid that he's so bottled that he's in the Madrigas ayin. So I wanted to flatter him. He says, the head for the Rebbe gesagt of dir ayin. He says, yeah, garnished, I'm a taka garnished. He says, it's true, I'm taka nothing. Garnished, I'm a taka garnished. Okay, go eat lunch.